Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is finally here after years of waiting. Does James Gunn give these beloved characters the send-off that they deserve? Let's discuss. Hey movie fans, so I just got back from seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now let's give a little bit of context for my experience with Guardians of the Galaxy. I really enjoyed the first one a lot. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I saw it multiple times in theaters. It took me by utter surprise, like a lot of people that saw it for the first time. The second one, I think, was thoroughly disappointing. I was very much underwhelmed with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. But then James Gunn did The Suicide Squad, which is my favorite DCU movie so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he brings to the table with DC. And then he did the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, which is so good, y'all. So my anticipation for this was slowly growing, and hoping that this would be a redemption for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and then also a good springboard for James Gunn as he makes the transition over to DC. As a whole, this is a phenomenal send-off to the Guardians of the Galaxy core cast. This movie definitely is not perfect, but this is the send-off that these characters so rightly deserve after all their many years in the MCU. Let's break it all down. The good, the bad, and then we'll circle back down to the good to round this out. This is a finale in all senses of the word. Like, these characters have been in the MCU since 2014. They just burst onto the scene and immediately made an impact by being so radically different from the rest of the MCU, just being this kind of idiotic ragtag team. And we get more of that here. You get more of this like arguing family dynamic, which can be a little grating at times, but then again, it's a pretty accurate representation of some people's families. It's endearing for the most part, and since it's a group ensemble cast, everyone needs a time to shine. And everyone really does. I'd make the case that the first Guardians of the Galaxy really is a Star-Lord story, and then everyone else kind of revolves around him. He's the emotional core of that first Guardians movie. The emotional core of this one is obviously Rocket Racoon, who I can't go into a ton of story details here, but he is the emotional core of this film. But the main driving force is the Guardians themselves. I would say it's, again, like Peter Quill is the forefront of it, but it's really an ensemble cast. But speaking of Quill, I think this is the best Chris Pratt has ever been in Star-Lord. He's continued to get better and better. I did have some problems with him in both Infinity War and Endgame and Guardians 2 of feeling a little too dumb and not like a leader. I kept kind of comparing him to the highly underrated Guardians of the Galaxy video game, in which case that game is phenomenal. The entire cast is so perfect in that, and that's kind of the team dynamic that I've always wanted from the Guardians, or the sense of what they should be, and I get more of that here. Quill seems like a competent leader. Everyone kind of has their role. They all kind of butt heads, but at the end of the day, it's still a good functioning group. But it's not just him. You get some great scenes with Batista as Drax the Destroyer. You get Karen Gillan really puts a big emphasis with Nebula this time around. She gets much more to do this time around because Gamora takes a back seat and Nebula kind of steps into the role that Gamora previously had. Mantis continues to be great. But there's other supporting characters that we've seen both in the Christmas special and Volume 2 that definitely come to the forefront here. It's just a great time with an all-around well-rounded cast, but I think in terms of standouts, it is easily the voice acting by Bradley Cooper as Rocket and the performance by Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. I think it's his best turn yet. This may sound a little cliche or just seems like an easy thing to talk about as a, well, that's a positive, is it's so nice for Marvel to have a movie that connects to literally nothing. There, the end credits for this movie, to which there are 2 end credits, do not tie into what's happening with Kang or the multiversal war. It finishes up the Guardians story. Heaven forbid we just tell stories about characters without latching them onto whatever future project will be out there. This is a proper send-off to the Guardians. It's not setting up other multiple TV shows or movies. This is, let's focus on these characters that people know and love. Let's give all our attention to them before James jumps ship to somewhere else. This is a self-contained story, and that has been so desperately missing from the MCU recently. Let's get more of these, please. Just good, well-made, competent storytelling with good arcs. Everybody's got an arc in this that is resolved to one extent or another. Really well done. James Gunn handles ensembles incredibly well. It's so nice to not have to do a whole bunch of homework and research to understand, oh, this is going to factor into this somehow. This is just a fun, dumb, almost video game-esque story of like, here's the mission, then here's the mission, then here's the mission. Once again, I'm shamelessly plugging the Guardians of the Galaxy video game, y'all. keep playing that. That is a phenomenal and highly underrated game. But yeah, this is a nice self-contained story. It helps if you've seen the other ones, but it's not required viewings that you see the other Guardians before this. This is just a good, independently told story, if that makes sense. Transitioning into some of the negatives, though, I will say, if you have kids, this might be a little intense for them. I'm not saying like a Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness level of like dark and grisly and violent. I am actually kind of surprised with some of the stuff that Disney allowed in this movie of just like, oh boy, this is kind of bleak / Temple of Doom levels of pessimistic here. And it's kind of that darkness and pessimism that I'm kind of on the fence about how I feel about the villain. Like, as a character, I don't know if he's as interesting and compelling as he could be. The performance is great, but I don't know. Again, I'm going to go with the wrestling terminology that I know here. If this guy is actually generating good heat, like people actually hate him, or it's cheap heat of you're doing the easiest, most slimeball thing to make me hate you, and it's not actually like that hard to make me hate you. You're just doing the most scumbag type of things of like, does that make sense? Of like, it's too easy that he's bad in terms of like, I don't know if the character itself is that engaging. Again, I think that's just me needing more time to process how the character plays out. Also, James Gunn is really well known for how he integrates music into his movie. You got Come and Get Your Love by Redbone right off the bat with the first Guardians of the Galaxy, which is just, that first Guardians soundtrack is so good. But I don't think all those music plugs or the needle drops fit particularly well in this movie. There's some that fit pretty well, and others, I don't want to go so far as to say the first Suicide Squad levels of bad, but it does tend to overdo it with the musical cues. It's like James Gunn is like, oh yeah, people really like the music from the first two. Let's just keep doing that. And it kind of overdoes it at times. It's a little bit of overkill. Not the worst, but there's a couple times I'm like, you could have probably drawn that back a little bit. And then lastly, because it's an MCU movie, not all the humor is going to work here. I think it works better here than some other Marvel movies, but there are some dramatic moments that I'm going, okay, we're going to ruin this with a bad joke, aren't we? Which doesn't happen nearly as much as some other recent MCU movies, but I give this one a pass because the Guardians have always kind of been goofy and out there. It's not like their humor kind of comes out of nowhere. After the first two Guardians and the Christmas special, you kind of know what to expect. If you're on board with that level of Guardians humor, you're gonna be on board with this level of humor, I think. It's just that awkward line sometimes of balancing the dark, because this is the darkest Guardians by far, and balancing that humor. I think for the most part it balances it well, but there are times I'm just going, not all of the jokes stuck with me, but that's the nature of any humor. Let's get back to some positives. I think, like I said, this is finality. This is the end of the Guardians as we know it. It is a tribute to these characters. It is a loving send-off in all senses of the word. These characters get the due that they are respected and earned, that they so desperately need. Everyone gets a satisfying ending to some degree. Everyone has a very fulfilling arc. It is closure. At the end of this, I'm okay with not seeing some of these characters again, just because of how conclusive their ending feels in this. It's a nice, comforting goodbye, so to speak, but it's hard to talk about without getting into too much spoilers. But by and large, I think this is a really solid movie. I think the first Guardians is still my favorite, but this definitely makes up for the second one, which I was definitely a little disappointed with. It's not the worst Marvel movie by any stretch of the imagination, but the third one is much better than the second one, and it is a proper loving send-off to these characters who, honestly, with James Gunn not in the MCU anymore, I don't expect these actors to stick around much longer. I know some of them said they'd be interested in sticking around, but I think most of them are jumping ship, and I'm curious to see what their futures have in store for them as well. But it's a good send-off, and I'm curious to see what James Gunn's going to do next with DC. What would you guys think? Have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? What did you think about it? Was it too dark for you? Was there too much humor? Are you a fan of the Guardians, or are there other Marvel teams that you are more a fan of? Whatever your thoughts, let me know down in the comments below. I always like hearing from you guys. And as always, if you haven't already, subscribe to us on YouTube and search for us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Uncharted Media Podcast and you'll find us there. And as always, stay sharp, movie guys and gals.